Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today we're going to be taking a wander through the Dark Wood Tarot by Sasha Graham with artwork by Abigail Larson and published by Llewellyn. So this is a deck that, truth be told, is the second time it's come into my collection. So the first time I got this deck, I actually picked it up in a trade. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll take a look. I'm not really sure it's my deal, it's my jam, but I was intrigued enough to trade for it, right? I do have to say, I do quite love the backs of this deck, and I'm kind of excited to edge it. But when I got it, I kind of just took a quick flip through the deck, and I'm gonna be honest, I flipped through the deck and went, yeah, it's not my thing. Like, if I was 20, and I'm just gonna be perfectly honest with you here, I feel like if I was 20, and it was, you know, back at that time in my life, I would have been like, this would have been like a soul deck, right? This would have been the deck that I've been like, oh, this is me. This is my deck. This is the one that's going to connect. And to be perfectly honest, as I was flipping through it, I'm like, I feel like I'm too old for this deck. And this is just me being perfectly honest with you about what my first impression was of this deck. So I put it back in the box, and I ended up rehoming it. So that was my first experience with the Dark Wood Tarot. I didn't even get into the guidebook or anything. I just looked through it and went, yeah, it's too young for me. Like, I don't connect with it. And then it showed up from Llewellyn to take a look at. So I was like, okay, this deck has come back to me again. So maybe I need to like give it a fair shot. Maybe I need to actually like take a look at the guidebook, do a proper walkthrough of it, because sometimes as a lot of other people who do walkthroughs here on YouTube, a walkthrough is just as much for me as it is for you. And that I can see how I am reacting and responding to a deck. I can get into the guidebook some and kind of see what's going on there and just really get a chance to experience the deck a lot more than I did when I just kind of took it out of its box, flipped through it and went, I mean, it's cool, but I'm too old for this. And that was my honest to goodness first impression, and off it went. So since then, once this deck came back around to me and I was like, okay, fine, I'll take a look at it. I started doing, watching some other walkthroughs from some people here on YouTube that I really respect their thoughts and opinions about tarot, and they love this deck. And I'm like, okay, these people that I really, really respect and admire are getting a lot out of this deck. I feel like, okay, maybe I was hasty. Let's just be honest. Maybe I was hasty and I was just like, first impression, nope, not for me, out the door. So this time we're actually going to give it a chance. So let's go ahead and jump into this deck. I am going to do things a little bit different than I normally do, because normally, you know me, I'm like, I'm gonna jump right into the cards. But I've seen the cards. So I'm gonna do it a little bit backwards. I'm gonna go into the guidebook first. There will definitely be a timestamp down below. If you don't wanna go through the book, that's totally cool. If you wanna jump to the cards, there'll be a timestamp for that. You could jump to the cards, jump back to the book, however it works for you. But because this is as much for me as it is for you, I feel like I maybe missed out on something by not kind of taking a look at the guidebook the first time around. Again, I feel like I've already seen the cards. Like, not only have I seen the cards in person the first time around, but I've also, seen the cards and watched many, many flip throughs of this deck now. And so I really kind of want to get into the book first. So we're going to actually skip all of the introduction information in this guidebook, because really what I want to get to is the story. There's lots of great walkthroughs if you want to check out all the introductory information, but it really is just kind of about how to work with the deck, how to read the tarot, and it would be, I think, really beneficial if you are new to tarot, but I want to jump right into the story because I feel like that is where this deck is really going to come alive. Once upon a time, a girl sat beneath a circular canopy of poplar trees who had always watched over her. She was a shadow witch who had grown like a beanstalk season after season, from a warm bundle in her mother's witching arms to a ravishing young woman. One night, the fat full moon was bursting with so much magic that it drew a tall, angular boy from the shadows to the girl's side. The shadow witch was everything the boy had searched for in his darkness. She stood before him under the rustling leaves on her tiptoes and tilted her head to receive her very first kiss. Their lips met. He opened her up to the deepest parts of herself. She felt a thunderous love. It was as if something simultaneously died and was born inside of her. Desire and tenderness poured from her into him and circulated through him and back to her. Their kiss sparked lightning strikes across the country, where no storm clouds were formed. Their embrace attracted armies of fireflies who swarmed and danced around them so brightly that the neighbors who'd come out to inspect the charred, smoking lightning strike scratched their heads in curiosity at the luminescent glow in the sky. But if you were to look down upon the girl on this day, as the trees, the birds, and the bugs always did, you would see chestnut hair spilling across her shoulders and her back heaving violently. You would hear her crying, sobbing, gasping for air. The girl's heart had split in two. Pain filled her body. She thought she was dying. She was too young to realize that heart opening always hurts. The boy had vanished without a trace. Hot tears spilled down her plumped rosy cheeks and slim neck. The harder she cried, the deeper the saltwater pools rose around her. The herbs and flowers she had planted in the grove were drowning in her sorrow. She gazed into her pool of tears and saw her glossy reflection. The air grew thick around her like mud. That's when she heard it. A familiar voice spoke in the silence. It was a language not she or anyone else could name. After all, once something is named, it is set in stone. It is time, said the voice. For what? She asked in a whisper, as if the glistening forest glen was eavesdropping on their conversation, which of course it was. You can stay here no longer, the voice said. But this is my home, she said as a hot, scratchy lump grew in her throat. She struggled to hold back a tide of fresh tears. I haven't the strength to leave. You must depart. Where am I to go? She asked, her cocoa eyes growing wide with full lips quivering. On a journey, said the voice. What do you mean? She asked. Follow the signs, replied the voice. What signs? Asked the girl. Silence answered her. She brushed herself off, remembering how her grandmother had taught her to be brave in the face of frightful things. Her grandmother's toffee voice played in her head. Embrace your fears, little one. Integrate them, or they will determine your destiny instead of you. The shadow witch wiped the dampness of her cheek and turned her attention toward the grove. She felt clear and hollow in a way a good cry scrubs you clean from the inside out. A scarlet cloth bag tied to a walking stick lay at her feet. She picked up the stick and was surprised to find it quivering with a vibrancy all of its own. The stick flew up, positioned itself across her shoulder, and spun her around so quickly she almost tripped over her own feet. A path leading to a gnarled gathering of willow trees appeared before her. She had never noticed these trees before. The willows stood like elders, wrinkled, twisted, yet strangely familiar. They pulled to her stomach like a magnet. As she wondered whether she dared venture forward, a velvety black cat nuzzled against her leg and padded towards the trees. Hello, she called to the cat, who meowed back nonchalantly. She figured she'd better follow along. The moment she did, she noticed a sweet red fox walking beside her. Hello, fox, she said. Are you a sign? Do I look like the sign? Asked the sly fox. No, she laughed. You look like a fox. Then that's what I am, he replied with a grin. It felt good to be moving. She felt safe with her furry companions, optimistic even. The willow branches grew dense like a web, and a quiet spider spun down from above her. A lizard crawled up from the ground and flicked his tongue in her direction. The girl forgot about the boy, her pain, her sadness. Adventure was afoot. She didn't see the razor-sharp, jagged cliff before her. She turned her face toward the sky and walked on, one delicate foot in front of the other. All was as it should be. She trusted the voice implicitly. She knew on some level that even when we are blind to looming pitfalls and hazards around us, it's more dangerous to never take that first step to begin with. After all, we never know when life is about to spring a surprise and transform our lives forever. Okay, so that's the prologue. I'm just going to be honest, I'm not thrilled with the whole fact that it starts with basically a boy breaking her heart. I feel like that's been done. But anyway, okay, let's actually look at the card. So the Fool is the archetype of the child. Each step brings you closer to your destiny. The Shadow Witch takes her first step into the dark wood. A leap of faith is required. The timid say it is foolish to enter darkness sans light, map, or direction, yet the Fool carries on with equal parts faith and ignorance. She tosses all preconceived judgments aside. The Fool acts in her own best interests. The Fool is a whole and complete agent of herself. She operates outside societal norms. She is not affected by the opinions, judgments, or advice of others. She is blessedly unaware of irrelevant prying eyes and speculation. Her wholeness is sublime. Each step unravels her perfection. The Fool begins her journey. The end is the beginning is the end. Her head tilts towards the sky, reflecting optimism and pleasure in the moment. Her tattered clothing reflects an individual operating outside the realm of polite society. She travels free from convention and obligation. Her bag contains past lives, karma, and experience. The white rose in her hand is purity and love. The black cat reflects feline magic. The fox is cleverness. The spider is the master storyteller. And the creepy lizard is passion and fire. The card is our human connection to the animal and spirit world. The jagged cliff generates with each step. The Fool walks in safety. So that's our story for the Fool. And one of the things I do really like is that the author has actually noted and made mention of what we are seeing in the card, and we don't often get that in guidebooks, and so I do really appreciate that she's noting what's on the card and why it's there. So I think that's really handy, and I do like that she has, you know, a little story here. She's going off in her journey. The idea that the cliff generates with each step with her is pretty cool. Like, she's going off in her venture and she walks in safety. So our meaning is a leap of faith, foolishness, a grand adventure, optimism, youth, all of our typical Fool meanings. And we do have a shadow meaning, which I think personally you could use if this card were to show up in a shadow position in your tarot reading. So maybe in a position of, you know, what are my challenges or things like that. You might want to look to the shadow meaning for that. It's probably meant to be the reversed meaning, but that is, since I don't work with reversals, that is how I used reverse meanings a lot of the time, or shadow meanings is just if the card were to show up in what is my challenge, I might look to the shadow meaning for that. So that's quite interesting. So now that I've had a chance to read the stories and look through the guidebook, I thought I would just kind of do a quick flip through and talk about some of the things that really stood out to me. I do love the idea of following the Fool through the journey of the major arcana, and I like the whole mention of the cliff keeps extending with her. I thought that was quite an interesting concept. Also in the guidebook, they do relate to all the little different elements that you see on the card, so that was quite wonderful. This magician in the guidebook, they mentioned that as the Fool comes across the magician, she wonders if that's her in the future, like if she's looking at her future self, which I thought was really cool. As you can see, it's very much related to the Waite-Smith interpretation of the tarot, which is totally fine, as this is that inspired deck. I quite like this High Priestess here, where she has this scroll that just very blatantly says tarot, and instead of having the B and the J, we have the D and the W. Kind of that idea of we're not really going behind those pillars of the High Priestess, we are going into the dark woods of the High Priestess, and I thought that was really cool and very fitting for this deck. The Empress is unfortunately not one of my favorites in this particular deck, just because it really spoke to just the mothering energy of the Empress. And I feel like that's sometimes a little bit limiting, but I do think that, you know, she's quite a beautiful card. There's a lot of young, beautiful people in this deck, and I do wish that there was a little bit more diversity. But the Emperor is quite interesting, although it does talk about like them not consummating their relationship. And yeah, let's hope not, because that's just weird. He's fine though. I do quite like this Hierophant card because I love the idea of it's the tree and it's got all of the holding all the books of knowledge. We have the key and the scroll, and the guidebook does talk about a path, following a path of books to get to this Hierophant, and it really does speak to the idea of it being a teacher, which is quite wonderful. This Lovers card is actually quite traditional because we have the man looking at the woman who's looking at the angel, which in this case is the dark angel. It does speak to this being, you know, like a dream in the book. And I thought that was kind of interesting because we're coming along, we're learning, but now we're in a dream. And we're going to come out of the dream, I guess, and we're going to embody the energy of the Chariot. I did quite like this Chariot card because it's not about just taking hold of the reins of the horses. It is about embodying the chariot and becoming a chariot. So in this sense, our Fool becomes a shapeshifter and takes flight to look over the whole of the dark woods, which I thought was really interesting for the Chariot card. The Strength card is quite interesting because it does speak to the idea of, you know, kind of aligning your chakras, getting in touch with your Kundalini energy. And it talks about the snake being kind of her manifestation, which I thought was quite interesting. Beautiful Hermit card, of course. It's on the cover of the box, and I do love the idea that she's walking into the cave where all of the knowledge is just written on the walls for her. I think that was lovely. The Wheel of Fortune was quite cute. We have all of these little imps representing the 4 elements, and they all have their little books, and I do love that it's a spinning wheel. I think that's quite beautiful. Very kind of traditional justice card, but I do love the idea of the book spoke about your personal truth, and I thought that that was really wonderful, kind of like taking responsibility for your own actions. Here we have the Hanged Man, which was the vampire upside down. The book speaks to this card as being the card of the mystic, and tapping into the idea of the vampire as the mystic is quite interesting. I do love that it is definitely a willing surrender more than kind of being strung up by your toes. This is making a choice to surrender to this energy, which I thought was quite lovely. Interesting death card. The angel and the death, I guess, is this Hanged Man transformed, which is quite interesting. And as a depiction for the death card, I think it works quite well. Really beautiful Temperance card. I do love the idea that it speaks to she's kind of standing at the path to the tower, actually, right? I feel like this is the path to the tower. Maybe I read that in the book. Maybe I'm just picking up on that, but I do think it's a lovely Temperance card. And what she's pouring back and forth between her cups, I do believe is like the spirit of life, which is fascinating. Interesting Devil card. This card very strikingly reminds me, and I think Kelly from the Truth and Story said it too, maybe not in relation to this card, but in this deck as a whole, to an old cartoon called Camelot. This card just like brought that right to the forefront for me. And, you know, it's really about kind of facing your fears, slaying your demons. I think that actually works quite well for the Devil card. So here we have our tower. And it was interesting because it talked about the square tower with the round roof that really doesn't fit. So it's just kind of taking off what no longer fits, what no longer serves you. And I thought that was quite clever. Beautiful Star card. I do really like this because it talks about the landscape. You know, we've blown everything apart in the tower, and now we're just in this open potential of the star, and I thought that was quite beautiful, actually. Lovely moon here where we have the figure kind of rising up into embody the energy of the moon. Again, we see that path, and now we see 2 towers. They're both stable. I think that's quite wonderful. I think that this is a lovely sun card in the fact of more of what's written in the book than so much the artwork. The artwork is beautiful, but it's quite, you know, it's a beautiful lady on a beautiful horse. But I love the idea of it's kind of more of about just embodying your true self. I thought that was quite wonderful. Here we have Judgment with the Fool, I guess, right? That's still our Fool. She's surrendering to the vampire here. She's surrendering to embodying this new way of being, which I thought was quite lovely. And here we see her in her fullness in the world where she's kind of completed her journey through the dark woods and come out the other side, no longer the Fool, but now this fully realized embodied being, which I did think was quite lovely. So moving into our minor arcana, we don't so much have a story. So like there's a story in the major arcana, right? We follow the Fool. In the minor arcana, we don't have a story, but there are definite references to things that we might have seen in the major arcana. I did quite enjoy that. So we have our Ace of Wands with, you know, the typical kind of hand holding the flame of inspiration there. We have the Two of Wands. Again, very Rider-Waite-Smith, but I do think that it works quite well for that. Here we have our Three of Wands, again, another vampire. Funny that the figure down here is, you know, this is her victim. We have our Four of Wands, which I did really think was quite interesting, and especially in looking at this as maybe a deck for shadow work, because we have this idea of the bridge, and I think of the fours as a number very much of stability. And, you know, kind of relating to that square that we see here represented in the wands. And we have this nice bridge that we can just kind of walk across this little babbling brook here. But there is so much going on underneath that's lurking beneath the shadows of this. And I thought that was quite interesting that, you know, sometimes what we think we want isn't always necessarily what we want. That's maybe not necessarily what was written in the book, but it's kind of just something that is kind of reminding me of, you know, be careful the type of stability that you're looking for, right? Be careful in what you're building, because there could be things lurking beneath the surface that you're not acknowledging, which I thought was quite interesting. Here's our Five of Wands with all of our little imps kind of fighting. I think this works really well for the sort of combative energy of the Five of Wands. Here we have our Six of Wands, which is basically like a parade. They don't quite look so happy. Like it's supposed to be a victory and a celebration. And it's really interesting because on all of their faces, they all look rather solemn. And it's not necessarily, to me, this maybe speaks to more of a hollow victory. And we are at the 6, not at the 10 or the end of the suit. So this is like a momentary victory. There's more to be done here. This is not the end of the road. And I do really, really like that for the energy of the Six of Wands. So here we have the 7, which I quite like with the big shadowy figure. Shadows do, I think, play a big role in this deck and something that I would definitely be paying attention to. Here we have our 8 of Wands, and it was really interesting because it was this idea of this mermaid who's just totally surrendering, and she's sending off her 8 wands like as her intention. So I think that's a really lovely kind of departure from what we traditionally see, which is our 8 wands just kind of slicing through the sky. It's an interesting depiction, something a little bit different, and I did really appreciate that. So here we have our 9 of Wands with our creepy clown, and he is behind the wands here, behind the gate. We definitely want to make sure he stays there, right? He's quite creepy. Here we have our 10 of Wands, and I do quite like that she doesn't look terribly burdened by all of her wands that she's carrying. Like she's got them all. She's good. She's in control of it, and I thought that was quite interesting. So here we have our Page of Wands, and I love the idea that she's, getting ready to light her little fire. Our Knight. Here we have our Queen of Wands, and she's quite beautiful. I do feel like she's like full on in her power, which is wonderful for the Queen of Wands. And same with the King. I do feel like they are a nice matching pair, and I do like to see that with my King and Queen. I like to see it with my Emperor and Empress, which I did not get in this deck because I do not like when creators make one of them an animal and one of them a human. That doesn't really work for me because I like to think of them as a pair. And particularly when the book talks about them consummating their relationship and one of them is an animal, that's a little bit weird for me. But I think these two as a pair work quite lovely together. So moving into our cups, we have this beautiful Ace of Cups, and I do really love this with the raven offering, almost like offering the pentacle. It does feel a little bit like we're kind of taking those worldly energies and kind of bringing them into the realm of emotion, into the realm of self. So I love that idea that we can integrate the two of those. I think that's quite interesting, and I really like the raven on there. It just really caught my attention. Here we have the Two of Cups, and I do quite like that we have these kind of like red-eyed, almost demon-looking horses, but they do look quite comfortable and cute and content with each other. So I think that is a wonderful representation for the Two of Cups because it not only speaks to the idea of, romantic relationships, but just partnerships in general, which I do appreciate. Here we have our Three of Cups with our little cats in collaboration. I think that works quite well. Our Four of Cups. This was really interesting because it talked about the one wolf here not really paying attention to what's being offered back here. And I think that works well for the interpretation for this, but I love that the artwork is a little bit more open, a little bit more expansive. So I don't feel like we're locked into that idea of boredom. I mean, she does look a little bored and disinterested with what her mate's bringing back to her, but perhaps she's also just patiently waiting. That can be a thing too. This Five of Cups, I think the artwork is quite interesting. I didn't really get the bunny connection. Like, I feel like I need to go back and read that entry again. I didn't really understand the significance of the bunny, but we have the cups with the blood spilling out, so the life force spilling out, and I do think that really does work well for the kind of disruptive emotional energy associated with the Five of Cups. So I didn't really get the bunny association, but I mean, it's cool. He does look sad, which is, I guess, works well for the Five of Cups. Here we have our Six of Cups, which I thought was quite a lovely interpretation for the Six of Cups. I do quite like the mother bird feeding the babies, and we have all the cups, and I love that there's flowers in all the cups. They look like moonflowers to me, but I could be wrong about that. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful depiction for the Six of Cups. So here we have our Seven of Cups, and one of the things that I really liked about this card was that, yes, we do have our 7 cups down here with all of our little things in it, but we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bats. And I love the idea that it talked about her sending these bats off to do her work for her. She's kind of gathered all of these cups, and they're actually behind her. So that makes me feel like these are all the things that she's going to be working on, and now she's sending the bats off to help her manifest that. And I thought that was really interesting, kind of just a different take on the Seven of Cups. And here we have our Eight of Cups, and I did quite like this for the 8. We have the snake that's leaving the nest of the egg nest here. I don't know anything about snakes to know if that's like common behavior for a snake to lay their eggs and then leave and move on and not come back. Perhaps it is. Somebody who might know better could let me know in the comments below. But I do really like the kind of snake that is wrapping its way around the cups. So it's kind of the idea to me of integrating all the lessons that we've learned so far through the cups. If we think of each of these cups as emotional lessons, the snake is wrapping its way around it. It's kind of learning those lessons and moving on from them and continuing on the upward battle. It did speak about this card being kind of on the path to the Hermit, which I thought was quite interesting. So interesting little Nine of Cups here. We have the cat that basically caught the canary, right? It's not a canary, but the cat that caught the bird. And it does talk about, you know, kind of being mindful of what it is you're trying to accomplish in this Nine of Cups energy here. Beautiful 10 of Cups with the little wolf family. I mean, that's just sweet. Just a great 10 of Cups card. Here we have our Page of Cups, and I do love how she has the little fish that's kind of manifested out of this string of energy or water or whatever it is that she's manifesting. I think that was quite lovely. Here we have our Knight of Cups. This definitely speaks to the romantic nature of the Knight of Cups. I feel like it does pigeonhole him a little bit into just being the romantic, and I think that the Knight of Cups is capable of being more than that. I think he's also capable of taking our emotions and bringing them out into the world. So in a sense, I also see him as being a messenger of compassion, and I feel like taking it in this direction really does kind of lock it into that sort of romantic nature of the Knight of Cups. But it is a beautiful illustration. I would have just liked to have seen like a horse at least or something to tie that back in. So here we have our Queen of Cups, and I do think she is quite lovely, and the write-up in the guidebook is quite wonderful on her. Quite enjoyed that one. Here we have our King of Cups, and again, look at this. They make a beautiful pair. I love how they are facing each other, and they are each kind of mimicking the posture of the other, and we definitely get the idea here, at least I do in this pairing, that of the fully manifested feminine and the fully manifested masculine of the emotional state, which I think is quite beautiful, and I really did like that depiction was done in that way. So moving into our swords, this definitely reminds me of like King Arthur and like taking up your sword of truth, right? I thought that was quite beautiful. I don't know that they referenced that in the guidebook, but that's just what came to mind. This Two of Swords, I think, is actually quite lovely because we can see all the shadows behind her, and the book does definitely talk about this being all in her mind, and I love in the reflection here, we don't see any of those shadows. So it really asks us to kind of stop focusing on the outward and kind of just close our eyes, get quiet, and focus on what's going on within our own mind. To me, this is all about quieting all those external voices and paying attention to the one voice that really matters, which is your own. And I think that's quite beautiful. I'll be honest, the Three of Swords is a bit of a disappointment because I feel like with everything else that we've had here and all these beautiful scenes depicted and all these kind of interesting representations for the cards, and I feel like this was a bit of a letdown for me because it just feels like more of the same with the heart, with the Three Swords in it. If you don't read this card as heartbreak, this can be a little bit more troublesome to get around. However, with it being an anatomical heart, maybe we could look at this as being like, you know, the blending of heart and mind. They spoke in the book about the threes being the number of creativity, so I really don't see that being represented here, other than maybe you could think of the spider's web as being this field of creativity, and we have the kind of joining together of the heart and mind within this web of creativity here, but I think that's kind of a stretch, to be perfectly honest. I would have liked to have seen something a bit more creative there. This Four of Swords is awesome. I love this Four of Swords because we have this kind of like Sleeping Beauty scene going on, but if you look, she's got one of the swords in her hand, and I feel like any minute, if he makes a wrong move, she's going to put him in his place, and I just quite love that. So it is the idea of, you know, resting, taking the rest when you need it, taking the break when you need it, but also knowing your limits, knowing your boundaries. And I just think that's super cool. So here we have our Five of Swords, and the book talks about, you know, hurting others, you know, kind of being careful about what you put out into the world. And I think this is a great reminder of being mindful about how we speak and how we interact with other people. It's not necessarily something I always associate with the Five of Swords, but I think this imagery does lend itself well to that. And I think it actually is quite an interesting depiction. So here we have our Six of Swords, and it's quite a traditional looking image. We do, though, however, have this person on the bank, like reaching forward. And I feel like this person is like, nope, bye, see ya, I'm out of here. I feel like this card could also very much speak to the idea of letting go of mindsets or people or whatever. We're in the Suit of Swords, so I'm thinking mindsets here, but letting go of the things that don't serve you anymore. Like, you need to just leave that there on the shore. You need to leave this old belief, this old mindset, this old way of being, perhaps even this old sense of self here on the shore. And you need to just take this baby, this new thing that you're working on creating here, and you just need to go ahead and you need to move forward. Even though maybe this could be your inner critic is like telling you, no, don't come back. You have to come back and get me. This card to me speaks to the idea of, no, let it go and move on, because that's what you need to do. And that's really what this card is kind of telling me. And I think it's quite cool. The Seven of Swords is interesting. It does very much relate back, I think, to the sort of thiefy energy on first glance of the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith Seven of Swords. But I love the idea that there is that sense of ambiguity in this card of we don't quite know exactly what is going on. You know, if you read the book, it does kind of give you a little bit of a story, but maybe, you know, is she stalking the wolf or is the wolf stalking her? We don't really know. And I think that's one of the things about the Seven of Swords is kind of, to me, it's a card of being mindful about your preconceived notions, because we don't always know what's going on. And I do think this card works beautifully for that. I love this Eight of Swords. It's really this idea of she's kind of just abdicated her own power here, and she just needs to like take it back. I think that works really well. To me, the Eight of Swords often speaks to kind of those negative thought patterns that we tend to, like the negative things we keep telling ourselves over and over and over again. And we can see that kind of represented through the swords. We can see it kind of represented through the bindings. Like, we just keep binding ourselves up with these same old thoughts, and they're not serving us, and we need to just let them go in order to break free of that pattern of behavior or that pattern of thinking. And I think that this card works beautifully for that. Here we have the Nine of Swords, which again, really beautiful kind of traditional imagery with the person with the nine swords behind them, really speaking to that idea of kind of overwhelming energy. We can definitely pull nightmares out of that, but you could also see that is a lot of energy that you need to do something with. It's just kind of sitting there hanging over your head, and it's really time to take it and move forward. So I think that works quite beautifully. This Ten of Swords is interesting. It talks about in the book about how this is like an ending of her own choice, because we don't see any blood. So I thought that was quite interesting. It talked about being the death of ego, which I do quite love for the interpretation of the Ten of Swords. It doesn't, however, look like she could really get up and move on from this in a physical sense. So this to me would speak more to of definitely surrendering the inner self, letting the inner self, you know, die away so that you could move on in another way of being. Physically speaking, I don't think she's getting up from that, but I think in terms of a death of ego, it's beautiful. Here's our Page of Swords, and she's quite cute. I love the little birds and some of the little details in this deck. Like, there's a little spider here. Some of the little details in the artwork is quite lovely that I do really enjoy. Here we have our Knight of Swords. I love all the birds around him. Like, I feel like he knows what he's about, man, and he's just going to go out there and do it. And I think that's super cool. Here we have our Queen of Swords, and I love that we have like these butterflies or bats, or I think they're butterflies, that are kind of emanating from her hand. And I do very much feel like this is kind of taking your thoughts, your words, the way you communicate and putting it out into the world, and doing so in a very confident way, which I think it works beautifully for the Queen of Swords. Here we have our King of Swords, and he does look quite pleased with himself. I love the vulture sitting on the top of the rock. I again think that's clever. So moving into our Pentacles, this is my favorite suit in most decks. And there are some things about the Pentacles that I really like, and there are some things about the Pentacles that I'm like, not so much. But I love the gate with the garden, and One of the things that I really do like is that the pentacles are all apple slices, which I think is super cool because apples tend to, you know, not only embody like wisdom, but sacred feminine. And there's a lot of symbology that can go into apples that I think really adds a really beautiful layer to the suit of pentacles in this deck. So this Two of Pentacles with this kind of scary tree. This to me kind of speaks more to the idea of like the making the difficult decision. Like he doesn't feel like he's really feeling pretty good about either one of these little pentacles or apple slices in his hand. And so I think that's quite interesting. Not every decision is a good one, right? Sometimes the choice is a bad choice and a worse choice. Or sometimes the choices are, you know, it's okay and I guess so. This Three of Pentacles I think is interesting. It's a very pippy card and it just does to me feel a little bit out of place with the rest of the deck. While I get the symbology of it, I feel like there's, again, could have been more that went into this, kind of similar to the Three of Swords energy. It's a beautiful card, but I just feel like it feels a little out of place with the rest of the interpretations. I do really like this Four of Pentacles with the Mandrake root, even though he does look very kind of miserly, and the keyword in the book is miserly. However, if you continue to read the book, there's much more there. To me, this definitely looks like just pulling in your resources, which is great for the Four of Pentacles. This Five of Pentacles is really interesting because you have this couple who's kind of fighting this uphill battle, and yet in this tree, there's all the pentacles they need, right? And I think the book does talk about this being the tree that's in the 10, where once they finally get through all of this, they can kind of collect all of those and make it through the tree onto the next stage, which I thought was quite interesting. Here we have our Six of Pentacles. Again, definitely can see that sort of Rider-Waite-Smith of, you know, generosity if you want to see it in there, but it definitely is, I think, the more shadow side of the card where we're looking at, you know, these girls or this girl. It was unclear about whether it was one or two girls, but it does feel like two different girls. We have one here that's making a contract or a deal with the devil, and the other one that's taking the pay, and perhaps neither one of them are really thinking about the consequences of their actions. So that's quite interesting for the Six of Pentacles. Definitely a more shadow version of it than I would normally see. Again, the Seven of Pentacles too also has a little bit of a shadow energy to it where, I mean, it talks about, you know, she's sleeping and she's safe in her sleep and all that, but this dude doesn't look like the Scarecrow is scary looking, and like the Scarecrow is supposed to watch over you, and I get that. She's, you know, waiting patiently and talks about the magic of pumpkins, but it does look a little bit creepy. I mean, it almost looked like the Scarecrow is not so much protecting her, it's kind of haunting her dreams, but that just could be my own shadows coming through there. So here we have the Eight of Pentacles, and it's interesting because we usually see this as kind of like the mastery card, right? We usually see somebody like working at their craft, and here we just see the pentacles are kind of growing. It's an interesting representation because I feel like it's kind of speaking to the idea of if you just follow your path and kind of do what it is that you're meant to do, like it'll just happen, right? And I think that's quite interesting. I don't think that was where they took it in the book, but that's what comes to mind for me. This Nine of Pentacles is quite lovely. Rather than like the falcon or anything, the bird energy is represented through the character herself, which is quite interesting. And, you know, we can see her in her garden, which is lovely. So here we have our Ten of Pentacles, which is actually kind of a gloomy looking Ten of Pentacles. But I do love the idea that it's this whole idea of kind of, you could go into this tree and maybe there is a big, beautiful, you know, the harvest gold world waiting for you in there. And I love the idea of this, all the pentacles being in the trees, and we have some birds here, we have some spiders. So it's a kind of gloomy version of the Ten of Pentacles, but I do quite like it, and I do think it fits with the theme of this deck. So here we have our page who's kind of examining her little pentacle that she has there. And our knight, and I do kind of like that the knight feels like he's offering this pentacle to this owl here. Interesting depiction for the Knight of Pentacles. This Queen of Pentacles is quite interesting. It definitely is tapping into more of that sensual, seductive nature of the Queen of Pentacles, but it also talked about with the Empress. And a lot of times I think the Empress and the Queen of Pentacles, they kind of trade traits back and forth. I like to see them being a little bit more distinguished from each other than that, but And I would have definitely liked to have seen her in more of a sort of Mother Earth kind of energy. But I do think she works quite well for kind of embodying the physical, manifest, powerful feminine energy. She does work quite well for that. And then here we have our King of Pentacles. And again, he looks quite pleased with himself. Very smug. He has everything he needs there, which I guess works for him. So overall, I would have to say that after reading the guidebook and actually going through the cards and all of that, I am pleasantly surprised by a lot of what's going on in the depictions. This card disappoints me, but we know. I do feel like overall it still definitely has a kind of young energy. The artwork, while very beautiful and very clever, does make me feel a little bit old, I'll be honest. I feel like if I had come across this deck in my 20s, it would have been golden. Like I would have connected with this deck in a hot minute. But that aside, I do really love a lot of what's going on in this deck. I really enjoy a lot of the interpretations that the artwork is taking. And when you combine that with what's written in the guidebook, it really does make a difference. And this is why I always say guidebooks are important, because the first time I went through this deck, as I mentioned, I just flipped through the cards and went, oh, young, super, super young. This is not going to work for me. It's not an art style that I'm typically drawn to, although it's absolutely beautiful. And the figures are all like, they're super young and beautiful. I mean, let's just be honest about it. That's super young and beautiful. And while I don't have any problem with that, it's hard for me sometimes to connect with that kind of energy when it's all throughout the deck, because it's hard for me to make a personal connection to it. But then we have cards like the Six of Cups, and isn't that just beautiful? So overall, yes, I am very, very pleased. I am glad that I gave it a second look through. I'm glad that I took the time to read the guidebook, because I do think that that really made a huge difference in how I was able to connect with the cards. Because once I kind of knew the story and started seeing, this world coming to life through the words in the guidebook, and then you combine that with these gorgeous illustrations, I do feel like I can connect with it a little bit better, much better than I did just flipping through it the first time. So I do want to just go ahead and give it a shuffle real quick. It is, of course, standard tarot size. It is on your typical newer Llewellyn cardstock, which I do quite like because it shuffles beautifully. I know some people don't quite like it because it is very thin. It's very, very thin. It's very flexible. But I find that overall my Llewellyn decks hold up really well, and they just shuffle like a dream. So yes, I am a fan of Llewellyn cardstock. Anyway. Okay, so it riffles beautifully. I'm guessing that, it's going to overhand nicely. It's going to slide around a little bit. I don't work with jumpers, but Two of Cups. Usually when a deck throws a Two of Cups card at me, usually it's a pretty good sign. It does shuffle well, and I can shuffle it either way, which is always nice. Sorry, it is going to catch my lights because it is that. It's not glossy. I've been calling it like satin because it's not like heavy laminated glossy. It's more just kind of a satiny finish, which is quite nice, except for when it catches my lights. But as far as you just working with it, it is actually really beautiful to work with. So let's go ahead and pull a couple cards just to see what we get. I am planning on working with this deck now that I've had a chance to really go through it. So I'm excited for that. There's that Ace of Pentacles. That's a good sign for me. Love the Pentacles. Six of Wands, and our Two of Swords. That's quite beautiful, isn't it? Let's pull it down there a little bit. So we have this hand here that's offering you the pentacle here, or the apple. In this deck, I'm kind of seeing this as being the apple is like the knowledge of life type of thing, right? It's the pentacles, it's the suit of the material realm, but there's knowledge to be gained there as well. We have the Six of Wands here. Remember, I talked about that being the card that feels like it's like your journey's not done. You can kind of celebrate, you know, what you've accomplished so far, but it's important to remember that you're not done yet, right? You still have things to go. And it's interesting that it's moving toward, like, the direction of the card is moving toward the Ace of Pentacles. And then here we have this gorgeous Two of Swords where we have kind of this shut out everything else and focus in on what it is that you need to be focusing on. Let me just tell you, that's a really actually quite powerful little reading for me, just right here in this moment in my real life. So I'm kind of pleased when that happens. I never really go into these with a super intention, or, you know, these little let's throw 3 cards down and see what we get. I never really go into that with intention of any kind. So it's always interesting to see what comes out. So we have the Three of Cups, the Page of Swords, and the Magician. So I do quite like what I'm seeing so far. I'm actually really excited to work with it, like to actually work with it, right? The cardstock I think is quite beautiful, and I do actually quite like the borders because the artwork does extend beyond. So the border is not so much a border as it's just like an inner frame that they've chosen to put in here to hold the titles, which I think actually works well. I think the setup on this deck is quite lovely. And of course it has, you know, the beautiful big guidebook, which I do love. And I'm really, really glad that I read because it did make a difference. You know, that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this video, is because I wanted to have a chance to get to know the guidebook and to look at the deck. And for anybody else who maybe kind of did the same thing, right? Looked at the deck or got it in hand or watched some walkthroughs and went, I don't know about that. I think that the deck really kind of comes to life and you're able to really step into this really kind of wonderful dark wood world. That really comes through when you actually pair the kind of base knowledge of the book with the cards. And you know, this is not a deck that I would probably rely heavily on the book. I feel like the book really just gave me a really great introduction to the deck and this world, and from here I would definitely be working with this more probably in terms of what I see in the card, in terms of my own personal interpretations of the tarot cards, and then what I see coming forth in each of these cards and what story they are telling me. And I think that's probably a key way that I'll be working with this deck, but we shall see how that goes. I would love to know if you have this deck, what you think about it, what your impressions are, how it's been working out for you, or if it's one that you've been considering or maybe one that you've passed on. I'd love to hear about that too. I'd also like to thank Llewellyn for sending me this deck to share with you today, and I'm definitely looking forward to working with it myself this month, so we'll see how that all goes. In the meantime, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.